Today we're going to explore the chunking strategy. We're going to look at how we can use it and why it's something that we want to use when we're reading a text. So our focus today is chunking. So first we really have to think about what that word means. What is a chunk? Literally, if we look at the pictures, we get a great illustration. On the left you have a cheese wedge with a small piece or a chunk cut out of it. So we have the chunk we're looking at there is a small section of a larger piece. On the right you have a big chunk of birthday cakes, or a pretty cake anyway. So while we can't see the larger piece, we know that that was once a part of a whole cake, and we have a small section of it. So literally, from those illustrations, we can gather that a chunk is a small part of a bigger element. While we may really want to sit down and eat that entire birthday cake, it's probably not a good idea for us to do in one sitting. We wouldn't be able to finish it. It may make us sick if we eat too much, but we can probably handle a small slice or a small chunk of that cake. So it's just a small part of a bigger element. So what does that mean? What is that? How can we apply that to what we read? Well, when we're reading, chunking is something that can be extremely helpful. It literally means that when we're chunking, we are stopping to examine or consider smaller pieces of the text at a time. Many times when we're given a text to read in class, on an assessment, even a book that we're reading, we can feel overwhelmed by the amount of words that are on the pages or the information that we're provided. So by taking that information and looking at it in small sections, stopping to think about what we've read, we're going to be able to process it a lot more smoothly and efficiently. So literally when we're reading, when you're chunking, it means you're stopping to examine or consider small pieces of a text at a time. So why on earth would we do that? Well, there are two main reasons why it can be helpful to you to chunk a text. First, it helps maintain focus while you're reading. I'm not sure if any of you have ever read something, especially a longer, lengthy passage, and once you got to the end of it, you really couldn't tell anything about what you read. The words kind of blurred together, and it all seems like one big piece of information. If you're stopping and thinking as you go, you're going to be able to stay focused when you're looking at it in smaller pieces. So it helps you maintain focus. Secondly, if you're stopping and processing what you're reading and jotting down that information, it's practically going to give you notes. Those notes can be used to help you answer questions at the end, which in a testing situation can be extremely helpful because it can give you it can help save you time. Instead of having to skim through the entire passage to try to find a piece of information, you can look at your notes and kind of determine what paragraph or what section of the text you need to reread or to focus on in order to get the information you need to answer the question. So number one, it helps you maintain focus, and secondly, it provides you with notes that will help you answer questions at the end. So we know why we should use it. How do we do it? Well, it's pretty simple. Number one, we read one paragraph or section of the text at a time, and then you stop. If you're looking at a text on a sheet of notebook paper or a sheet of paper, in the margin, you would write a brief summary of what you read in that paragraph, the most important information in your own words. Essentially, you're looking for the main idea. If you're looking at a text on a piece of paper, you can write it in the margin. If you are looking at text on a computer screen or on a projected screen, on a sheet of notebook paper or scratch paper, you could number the paragraphs and then jot your information beside those numbers so you can keep track of what information comes in what order. Again, that's going to be helpful as you're answering questions and go back into that passage. Once you've done that step 2 for the first paragraph, then you're going to repeat that step until you have read the entire passage. What's important is that you're stopping at the end of each section, thinking about what you've read, putting that information in your own words, writing down the main idea, and then moving on to the next paragraph until you've read the entire passage. So let's look at what that looks like in real life application. If we look at this particular section of a passage, we're going to look at each paragraph together, and then we're going to determine what the main idea or what we would want to chunk, what seems to be most important from each section. So if we look at paragraph number 1, it says, "Do you know where the most expensive house in the universe is located? Some might guess Hollywood, where some of the richest and most famous movie stars have their homes. Others might think of New York City, where a one-bedroom apartment in Manhattan can cost more than a mansion in the suburbs. But they would all be wrong, because this is a trick question. The most expensive house isn't even properly located on Earth. It's the International Space Station, which is circling in orbit above us right now. The cost to build this engineering marvel, which is roughly the size of a football field, is around $150 billion. So if we stop and we process and think about what we just read in paragraph number 1, essentially the main idea seems to be telling us that the most expensive house in the world is the International Space Station. It gives us the size of the space station, the approximate cost, but the main idea is that the largest house is the International Space Station. So our chunk for this particular passage is literally the largest house is the ISS. If I had the text in front of me, I may also underline or highlight the size and the cost, that those seem like facts that may be helpful or may show up again in the future. But I have determined what the purpose of this particular passage is. The second paragraph, if we go to the next step, tells us that many different governments cooperated in order to plan and build the ISS, including the USA, Russia, Japan, Canada, and Europe. These entities decided to work together on the project only after developing plans independently for related space projects. By combining forces, they reasoned they could split the cost of constructing a space station and also share resources while on board the station. So if we stop and we think about what that particular passage is telling us, we can come up with a pretty specific idea. We have several countries listed, and we see this word in the second line that says together. They're working together. Right underneath that reinforces that idea. They're combining forces. And by doing that, they're able to fund and support a project that otherwise would be very financially challenging for one country to undertake. So it tells us in that last paragraph they're doing that. They're joining together to split the cost of construction and share resources while on board the space station. So a couple of things that we can look at. Number 1, international means many countries. That means we have more than one that's working together. We also know they're joining together because they're splitting the funds that's required for this to run the space station, and they're sharing resources as well. So those are our main ideas from that particular paragraph. Our final paragraph in this passage tells us that these countries envision 3 important purposes for their joint project: to support scientific research, to help astronauts continue to explore space, and to educate the public. Thus, the engineering criteria for the space station had to include facilities to support each of these important missions. So if we think about what's happening in that particular paragraph, our eyes should probably be drawn to this colon, which is signaling that a list is following after that. To support scientific research, to help astronauts continue to explore, and to educate. If we read through the paragraph again, we find that those 3 items are the 3 purposes for the project. So if we were chunking this particular paragraph, we would make a note in the margin that this paragraph tells us about the 3 purposes for the ISS. Instead of writing it exactly as it's written in the page, we can shorten it and say that our purposes were to research, explore, and to educate. So now that we've done some practice together, let's look at another paragraph. If we'll take a moment, we'll pause the video to give you an opportunity to read through the paragraph. And then on your paper, take some practice writing down what you feel would be the best way to chunk this particular paragraph. What would be your 4 to 5 words or phrases that would tell us what the main idea would be. And then go back and tell us what you think what words or phrases did you read that helped you reach that conclusion. So if you'll pause the video, take a moment and make sure that you're reading through and thinking through the process. What is this one paragraph about? Okay, so now that we're moving forward, let's look at this paragraph together. It says, life aboard the ISS has become relatively more comfortable thanks to technological improvements developed by engineers. However, it has not always been easy for the engineers back home to work on the space station. Space travel and construction of spacecraft are 2 of the most expensive projects a country can take on, and as the economies around the world shift, some countries have a harder time contributing financially. Sometimes, engineers from different countries would disagree about the best way to build something. And while some people in the space station project think it's a good idea to charge money to space tourists in order to provide more funds for the project, or to charge companies a lot of money to advertise their businesses on the rockets that fly to the ISS, others think that these ideas do not align with the original purposes of the ISS. But the fact is, no country or individual can afford the giant price tag for this important space house alone, so they must keep working together. And the results, whether they include important new scientific discoveries, easier and more frequent missions to Mars, or better cultural relations between our countries, are sure to benefit us. So if you look at this particular passage, this seems to be giving us some information about the challenges that come when you have more than one country or group or organization working together that may have different ideas about the way something should go, but also about the benefits that can emerge from that partnership in focusing and working together. So a couple of things that we could have chunked from this passage would be that countries often disagree. Any groups that are working together may have different ideas about exactly what plans should be in place. It also could tell us that the benefits outweigh the obstacles that may be in place, especially in that last paragraph. It tells us that we have important new scientific discoveries and more frequent missions and better cultural relations. Those are all things that are going to benefit us. So what we have highlighted in red would support the idea that the benefits outweigh the obstacles that may be overcome. And what's underlined in yellow are some details that would tell us that countries or any groups working together may disagree. And this can propose challenges to the project and undertaking. So let's take a moment and think back through what we have looked at today with chunking. Chunking, we have said, for a couple of reasons, can be very helpful. It provides us with a way to focus as we're working through a larger passage. It also can be helpful in providing us notes to give us as we're answering questions at the end of an assessment. What we'd like you to do is, on your sheet of paper, explain why chunking can be beneficial to you when reading a passage. Think about the ways that it can be helpful and the ways that you can incorporate it into your daily practices while reading.